Before we begin the meeting, just to remind all those who are joining via Zoom that they should have their cameras and microphones turned off at all times during the meeting until invited to speak. And for their own privacy, camera backgrounds should be set to blurred. So, Kim, we're ready? We start the meeting. My name is Councillor Penny Rivers and I am the Vice Chair of this committee, but will be chairing this meeting this evening. Members and officers, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. Please keep your microphones on mute when you are not speaking. Please can any questions be kept brief and to the point. And ward councillors should sit separately from the committee while applications in their wards are being considered and voted on. Please keep your mobile phones and handheld devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. If a fire alarm sounds at any time, we're not expecting one, but everyone should leave immediately through the nearest fire exits and proceed calmly to the assembly point on the Berries Field across from the car park. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being webcast and will be capable of repeated viewing. So if you are seated in the council chamber, it is likely that cameras will capture your image. You will be deemed to be consenting to this and to the use of those images and sound recording for webcasting and for training purposes. If you are speaking at this meeting, your contribution will be recorded and broadcast. May I also remind members of the public in attendance this evening that we appreciate respect to be shown to all those addressing the meeting. Interruptions or disrespectful behaviour will not be tolerated. We come to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Kim.
Thank you, Chair. We have had apologies from councillors Clark, Coburn, Rubini and Lawton. No substitutes.
Thank you.
Oh, apologies from Councillor Gale.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Do you agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 21st of January? Thank you. And declarations of interest?
None received prior to the meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Questions by members of the public? We have none. Questions by members? We have none. We have none. Agenda item number 6, any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since we last met? Claire.
Chair, there aren't any updates this evening.
Thank you. And agenda item number 7, appeals decisions. Do you so note those? Thank you. So, I ask everyone to respectfully listen to the views of all the speakers, whether they are members of this committee, whether they're ward councillors or members of the public. No disturbance or heckling of the committee or any other speakers during the meeting will be tolerated, and the public may be asked to remove themselves from the chamber if this occurs. Should we need a break, or should anybody need a break, please indicate. Councillors who are appointed to this committee sit as representatives of the whole Waverley community. Accordingly, all councillors must act fairly, openly and apolitically. All councillors must approach each planning application with an open mind and avoid preconceived opinions. We must all carefully weigh up the relevant issues and determine each application on its individual planning merits. We must avoid undue contact with any interested parties and ensure that the reasons for our decisions are clearly stated. Our decisions must be made in accordance with the relevant statutory framework, to include the National Planning Policy Framework, our own planning policies, and other material planning considerations. We have 4 minutes for public speaking, and that will be monitored. As set out in our public speaking procedure rules, may I also remind public speakers that in making their speeches, they should be mindful of the need to avoid making public statements which could be construed to be defamatory, frivolous, offensive, and should refrain from making allegations regarding individual officers or councillors. Speakers must address their comments to the application, and the committee may only take into account relevant planning considerations. So we come to agenda item number 8, and our first application is WA 2025-00597, land south of junction with Sachel Court Drive, Loxwood Road, Alford. Robin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. This is, as just stated, the outline planning application for land south of the junction with Sachel Court Drive and Loxwood Road in Alfold. It's an outline application with all matters reserved except for access. This slide provides an aerial view of the site for context. As you can see, the site is labelled in red, and Alfold village lies predominantly to the north and east of the site. This is a more detailed plan of the site, which shows what will be demolished or removed as part of the proposed application, should it be approved. The block red shows the small number of buildings that are to be removed and demolished, and then the hatched red is the landscaping elements, trees and hedges that will be removed. As you can see, a border will be maintained between the proposed development area and the boundaries of the site. You can see that in grey. This just provides more context details of the site itself, including showing the barns and one house that would be demolished as part of the site. That's just further photographs of the site itself. This is a proposed indicative layout that would be dealt with under reserved matters, so this is for illustrative purposes only. But it shows the extent of the site, where the access lies on Loxwood Road to the east. There will be a public footpath link to the public footpath to the north of the site, which is shown in a yellow dotted line to the north. There was a proposed one to the south as well, but that would require crossing some land that is not part within the red line of this site, so will not form part of the proposal. The buildings are all proposed to be 2-storey only, with no buildings higher than that, and 30% of them will be affordable. This provides the details of the access, which has been agreed in principle with the Highways Authority, showing the details. And this is the flood zone mapping for the site. It's in flood zone 1, which is characterised as a very low risk area. In terms of the planning balance to be assessed, there is an in principle policy harm, which is recognised as this is land outside of the settlement boundary, which is also recognised. And there have been concerns and objections raised from Southern Water and Thames Water with regard to the ability of the network infrastructure to deal with this quantum of housing. That is balanced against the need for housing within the borough and the presumption in favour of sustainable housing development by the MPPF. As there is some loss of agricultural land, which is recognised, this is balanced against the fact that the land is not within any protected landscape and would provide a sustainable location for 70 new homes, 30% of which would be affordable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have several speakers. The first is Tim Hugo. Mr. Hugo, you have 4 minutes from when you start.
I wish to present a reasoned rebuttal to the officer's recommendation and demonstrate that the approval will be premature, harmful and contrary to local and national planning policy. The uniqueness to the site location and Oldfield neighbourhood plan. This application lies outside the settlement boundary in open countryside. The proposal would cause permanent harm to the rural character that defines Oldfield, urbanising a sensitive gap between Oldfield and Oldfield Crossways. The site has been previously rejected by Waverley for development. I quote, "The site lies within the countryside beyond the green belt. It does not adjoin the settlement boundary, and there is a 60-metre gap between the settlement boundary and the edge of the site. Development on the site would not integrate well with the existing settlement and would have an adverse landscape impact. The neighbourhood plan places strong emphasis on protecting the open countryside. 70 homes in this location would be a suburban extension into open fields, wholly at odds with policies on local character, design and landscape protection. If you approve this, the physical separation we rely on to maintain each settlement's character will be irreversibly eroded. Biodiversity. The officer's report identifies that biodiversity net gain cannot be delivered on site. The loss of fields, hedgerows and habitats cannot truly be mitigated elsewhere. This is particularly important given the presence of nightingales, a red-listed species that has suffered a 90% decline in the UK over the past 50 years. They require specific, careful, managed habitat. Once lost, that habitat cannot simply be recreated. Significant and demonstrable harm. Planning inspectors often conclude that the loss of foraging and nesting habitats for common nightingales, a red-listed species, represent a significant and demonstrable adverse impact that outweighs the public benefits of housing, even with a 5-year land supply shortage. Surrey HER Brydion Farm. You're being asked tonight to approve the total demolition of Brydion Farm, a building identified by the applicant in the Surrey HER as a non-designated heritage asset. This is not minor harm, it is complete and irreversible loss. Paragraph 216 of the MPPF requires you to undertake a balanced judgment, having regard to both the significance of the asset and the scale of harm. That exercise has not been carried out. The building is dismissed as being of low value considering its age and scale. That is not a heritage assessment. Age and scale do not determine significance. There is no structured analysis of its historic, architectural, evidential or communal value. Without that, you cannot lawfully undertake the balancing exercise required by national policy. What is the clear and convincing justification for total demolition? There is no evidence that retention or conversion has been properly explored. Demolition is the only viable option. The total loss of this locally identified asset is necessary to achieve the scheme's benefits. Procedural fairness. The updated information from the case officer is presented to the committee via a late addendum is unfair to objectors who relied on the previous assessment, potentially leading to a challenge. I ask the committee members to ask for a deferral to allow a new report to be produced including the evidence from the Conservation Officer and HER report. This ensures that the committee makes a decision based on accurate, up-to-date and fair information. Conclusion. The officer's recommendation relies on housing need, but overlooks significant demonstrable harm and clear policy conflict. The committee should refuse the application to protect Alfold's character, respect the neighbourhood plan, and maintain the vital open space between Alfold and Alfold Crossways. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hugo. When you finish, or when you've moved, Mr. Foy, you're the next speaker. Mr. Foy, you have also 4 minutes from when you start.
Chair, Vice Chair, members, you have consistently prioritised infrastructure and evidence when development pressures rise. Tonight, Alfold needs you to apply exactly the same principles again. Alfold's wastewater network hasn't just reached capacity, it has failed. Collapsed pipes now allow surface water to flood both the Thames water and the southern systems, and raw sewage is on our roads and fields. This week alone, the Alfold and Dunsfold pumping stations failed, along with Southern Water's Loxwood Road station. For the first time in 34 years, waste is being tankered daily from the old school playground by Southern, right at the entrance that you've just seen to this site. I have to ask you, would any of you put up with someone else's poo in your kitchen sink? Because that is the lived reality of our residents today. Both Thames and Southern confirm there is zero capacity and no upgrades possible within the current price review period. The officer relies on conditions 28 and 29. They are not pre-commencement Grampian conditions, which we need. Southern Water is already signalling a retreat, suggesting some homes may connect before reinforcements. Adding load to an already failed system is a conscious choice to create an unacceptable pollution risk, directly breaching NPPF 180E. Our electricity network is equally unfit, a brittle radial system that repeatedly blacks out. It cannot support the EV chargers, heat pumps or solar export required under Part S and NPPF 15. Councillor Gale knows all about how fragile rural networks are. Councillor Spence, as audit risk and chair, will know that relying on evidence contradicted by statutory undertakers exposes this council to clear legal risk. The officer's report also contains a clear material error of fact. It states residents have access to a convenience store, but that store closed on the 18th of June 2022. This is not a typo. It fundamentally undermines the sustainability assessment under NPPF 109 and 130. How can we rely on a report that gets something so basic so wrong? Alfold has no shop, no pub, no daily services within walking distance. The nearest pint of milk is 2 kilometres away at an M&S garage along unlit roads with restricted pavements. Manual for Streets and policy ST1 use an 800-metre walkable catchment. At 2 kilometres, this is 2.5 times the accepted limit, a clear failure of sustainability. A shop closed for 4 years is not a convenience, and expecting a parent or an older resident to walk a mile to a petrol station is completely unrealistic. Councillors Keane, Rivers and Coburn have always pushed for accuracy. This report is not accurate. Alfold has moved beyond growth into saturation with a 393% increase over the neighbourhood plan allocation. The spatial strategy has been completely bypassed. The cumulative harm to character, safety and function now demonstrably outweighs any benefit from 70 units. Under NPPF 11D, benefits must outweigh harm. Here, these benefits are built on sand. This refusal tonight for you is rock solid. Water companies confirm no capacity. Electricity cannot support the modern homes being proposed. Sustainability claims rely on false information. Infrastructure is unfunded with no timelines. This proposal is not deliverable, not sustainable, and fundamentally not safe. Chair, members, we are sister communities facing the exact same development pressures. Farnham, Hazelmere, Whitley, Milford have all had their own turns confronting unsafe infrastructure and inaccurate reporting. Alfold will stand by you when those battles return to you, as they will. Tonight, it is our turn. We are asking you to stand by us. Tonight, Alfold needs you to say it again, loudly, infrastructure first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foy. And our next speaker is Meryl Baker. You also have 4 minutes from when you start.
Good evening, Chair and councillors. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Meryl Baker. I'm an Operations Director at Waits Developments, and I'm here this evening to support your officers with their recommendation to approve the application before you, which is recognised to make a significant contribution to your housing supply in a sustainable location. We cannot ignore the context in which this decision sits. Housing in the UK is now less affordable than anywhere in Europe, with average house prices consuming a greater proportion of wages than in any other comparable country. Here in Waverley, house prices stand at currently 19%, 19 times the average earnings. This is one of the highest ratios in the country, and with over 750 households are on the Waverley affordable housing waiting list. The reality of the housing crisis is families living in overcrowded homes, children growing up in temporary accommodation, young people unable to remain in the communities and where they were raised, and of course, key workers priced out of the area they serve. I speak knowing that this committee has not supported a recommendation of this nature in recent times, resulting in your refusals progressing to planning appeals. Appeals, as you know, are highly expensive for the taxpayer and very time-consuming for all concerned. I also note that this application has no statutory consultative objections from the County Council Highways, Surrey Wildlife Trust, or your urban design officer. With regards to Southern Water and Thames Water, we believe as well on file there are no statutory objections, and I refer to the agreed conditions. The proposals are up for 70 net zero ready homes. Homes with a clear purpose to provide comfort, security and stability for families, couples and individuals who need them. 21 of these would be affordable, including social rent for those in greatest need on the housing register list, as well as affordable home ownership. The homes are green and would be powered by air source heat pumps with solar PV panels installed and an electric car club provided on site for not just the benefit of new residents, but existing ones and the wider community. A new children's playground, new footpath and cycle routes connecting into the local public rights of way would be brought forward as part of the proposals, and around a third of the site would be public, green, open space for the wider community to enjoy. In addition to the scheme, It would deliver nearly £3 million in contributions to Waverley Borough Council through 106 and SIL contributions, with a proportion of this funding allocated directly to Alfold Parish Council in accordance with Waverley Borough Council's SIL regulations. I endorse you to support your officers and transform the lives of at least 150 individuals, couples, families, parents, grandparents, children, and others who would cherish a new home. I'll now hand over to my colleague Tamsin, who's going to provide guidance on the local water network.
Thank you. So, Tamsin, you do have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Tamsin Bennett. I'm Waits' Senior Technical Manager. We recognise that residents have raised concerns about the foul water infrastructure in Alfold, specifically Clappers Meadow Pumping Station, and it is right that these matters are carefully considered. As clearly set out in the officer's report and recommendation, the proposed planning conditions are robust. We also don't believe that Thames Water and Southern Water have raised objections. The foul water and surface water strategy must be submitted to and approved by the Council and the relevant statutory authorities. Waits has also sought to proactively engage with Thames Water and Southern Water at an early stage, and we continue to engage with them throughout the process. I also remind members that water companies have a legal obligation to provide sewer and potable water connections to each and every one of us under the Water Act 1991. Southern Water have confirmed that any works required to provide a connection would be complete within 24 months of an outline planning decision. That programme aligns comfortably with the anticipated build timescales, ensuring that necessary infrastructure will be delivered before the houses are occupied. For clarity, our proposed connection point is the first manhole in Southern Water's network. This is the same manhole that receives the foul water directly from Thames Water's pumping station. Therefore, it's critical to note that our connection is downstream of the pumping station and therefore won't increase flows to or place additional burden upon the specific pumping station. This is confirmed in the officer's report. Furthermore, a requirement for a connection at this location provides Southern Water with a clear regulatory interest under Section 106 of the Water Act to ensure that the point of entry onto their network operates effectively. In practical terms, this creates a strong incentive for Southern Water to engage with Thames Water to ensure that the required upgrades are delivered. As referenced in the officer's report, Thames Water's project team is progressing with upgrades to Clappers Meadow Pumping Station, and we are proactively liaising with them to try and get some more information on the delivery timescales. I appreciate the level of concern, but please be assured there is a clear mechanism through the planning conditions and ongoing engagement with Southern and Thames Water to ensure the necessary works are delivered ahead of this site. It's my professional opinion, and based on 15 years of delivering infrastructure, that you should agree with your recommendation of your officer, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We have another speaker, Councillor Chris Britton. Mr. Britton, you too have 4 minutes from when you start.
No.
That one. Yeah.
It's gone. Right. Madam Chairman, councillors, my name's Chris Britton. I'm an Alfold Parish Councillor and Chair of our Planning Committee. I'm here to express the deep concerns of the local community expressed in 78 written objections and reinforced by the Parish Council's own objection and professionally commissioned report about the impact of 70 new homes outside the settlement boundary. It's no exaggeration to say that the decision you take tonight is existential in terms of its impact on the village of Alfold. Alfold's already been forced to take a disproportionate amount of new housing, almost 500 homes, following planning appeals, having the net effect of more than doubling its size in around 5 years. This is set against a local plan target of just 125 homes by 2032. Alongside this, the basic infrastructure in the village, including the foul drainage, water and electricity supply, has not improved, despite promises. The village is now literally submerging in a sea of escaping wastewater. Our one village shop has closed, we still have no school or doctor's surgery, and the road network can't cope. The problem of cumulative growth is ignored every time a major new application like this is under consideration. We're fully aware of the pressure on the Borough Council to build homes, given the lack of a demonstrated 5-year housing land supply. Officers therefore refer to the tilted balance in reaching their conclusion that this major housing development should be permitted. However, under the NPPF, this consideration is exactly what it says, a balance, not an automatic green light. It is for you to consider whether the harm of this development on this scale and at this location outweighs the benefits. And above all, the NPPF still retains the golden thread that developments must be sustainable. Foremost amongst material planning considerations is that this development contravenes the Old Fold Neighbourhood Plan, which has statutory status. Concernedly, the officer's report makes no reference to the professional report by Troy Consulting, which I hope you've all had a chance to read, which gives material planning reasons for rejection based on the Old Fold Neighbourhood Plan and the NPPF. The plan was made in 2024 and is therefore current and more up to date than the Waverley local plan policies. As well as policy breaches, this report provides evidence of a shocking lack of public consultation by Waits Construction, who sought no conversations with the parish council. AMP Policy H1 explains clearly why housing development should be restricted to small scale and within settlement boundaries. We fundamentally disagree with the conclusion that the policy harm is of limited weight in this case. The AMP policies do meet current identified local need and constraints, and it makes no sense to dismiss the policy just because the wider borough has an increased housing target set by government. AMP policy PSC1 limits development that would cause coalescence between Old Fold and Old Fold Crossways. The Brydian Farm site forms one of just 2 remaining fields separating the two, and therefore it's in direct conflict with our policy. On transport, most daily needs require travel to Guildford or Cranley. Given the poor public transport services, no trains, irregular buses, the development will be car dependent by design, failing to meet national policy, local plan policy ST1 and neighbourhood plan policy TT1. The proposed contributions and mitigations offered by the developer are wholly inadequate to address the harms identified, which require long-term investment. No attempt was made by Waits Construction to find out what the community actually needs. No contribution is made towards education. No shop. The contribution towards a digital demand responsive transport service stops after 4 years. The contribution towards traffic safety is not only derisory, £50,000, but also duplicates a speed reduction scheme that's already funded and underway. SIL contributions can only be used on qualifying projects which exclude the vital infrastructure shortfalls such as
Mr.
drainage.
Britton, are you just about to finish?
I'm just about to finish, yes, madam. Members, weighing the harm from this development in this infrastructure poor location in breach of numerous policies against the simple benefit of providing extra homes demonstrates that this application should be soundly rejected, notwithstanding any tilting of the balance. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have 3 councillors, starting with Councillor Liz Townsend. Liz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just find my place, apologies. I thought I'd be next. I wouldn't be next. So thank you for allowing me to speak. And I don't do this lightly. I am obviously the planning portfolio holder. And first of all, I'd like to place on record my appreciation for our planning officers. They work within a national framework that does not align housing targets with infrastructure delivery. The imbalance is systemic and not of their making. This application site sits within an area of water and sewage stress that existing residents are having to cope with and over which they have no control. Whilst I fully recognise that Old Fold, like Cranley, does not have the policy and landscape protections of the vast majority of the borough that is covered by Greenbelt and national landscapes, and that this is a material consideration, This must not be the sole driver of growth in these areas that have little or inadequate supporting infrastructure. What is a fact is that residents in Alfold, for as long as I can remember, have been experiencing issues with sewage backing up into their homes, with gardens that have been contaminated, and with the ongoing worry that every time it rains heavily, they will see this being repeated again and again. Alongside prolonged and frequent discharges of raw sewage into our river network, thousands of hours of discharge, and that's only the ones that have been recorded. And I know for a fact that the monitor at the sewage treatment work in Cranley was offline for months and is subject to an Ofwat complaint. These are actually not theoretical risks, they are evident, repeated occurrences affecting people's daily lives. From a planning perspective, the position is clear. The applicant has not demonstrated that there is sufficient foul drainage capacity to accommodate this development without worsening existing sewer flooding. There is no robust hydraulic modelling of the downstream network. They have not secured deliverable infrastructure upgrades in place prior to occupation. I have myself been chasing long promised details of Thames Water's investment plans for the whole of the borough, and these have simply not been forthcoming. I don't even know if they exist. There is also insufficient evidence to demonstrate that there will not be a deterioration of water quality under the Water Framework Directive. Another material consideration. Whilst conditions have been included in the report on this point, and rightly so by officers, there is no evidence to suggest that these can be met. Under the National Planning Policy Framework and our local plan, development must be supported by adequate infrastructure and must not increase flood risk or cause unacceptable pollution. The statutory right to connect under the Water Industry Act operates separately from the planning system. It does not remove our responsibility to assess the planning impacts of additional development where there is credible evidence of existing failure. And there is failure, and all of us in this room know that. I have been raising concerns about this issue for about 12 years. It was one of the reasons why I became a councillor. In 2016, I attended a meeting with Andrea Ledson, people remember her, together with the Environment Agency's Executive Director. I met with Kit Malthouse. I've repeatedly engaged with Thames Water, written to the CEO, met with the CEO, came here to Godalming, you might remember, and I pressed regulators to act. Nothing has happened. Promises have proved empty. Only last night I witnessed tankering at Cranley Sewage Treatment Works. Despite my efforts and the efforts of many organisations across the country, successive governments have not acted. The previous government did not act when it had power to change legislation. They did not regulate the water companies sufficiently, and they did not sufficiently accommodate these significant deficiencies into planning legislation. They turned a blind eye and left local planning authorities in the firing line. And unsurprising, the situation for our residents has got worse and worse, and they are understandably fed up. And it's not just sewage and pollution. We also have water stress in our area, which is forecast to worsen as well. This committee cannot resolve national planning policy tonight, but we do have responsibility to ensure that development in this borough is genuinely sustainable and does not compound existing harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor Jerry Hyman. You too have 4 minutes, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Well, I've said it before in this chamber, and in respect of protected habitats and species, it's something which a lot of people of Alfold and that area don't realise. But the evidence base for the local plan 2018, Waverley's LPP1, in the evidence base for the habitats regulations assessment. A survey from, I think, 2012 identified that the Weldon Heaths SPA has a visitor catchment of 15 kilometres, which would include Alfold. And I don't expect a lot of people from Alfold to travel up to the Devil's Punch Bowl or other areas of the Weldon Heath Spa very often. That survey wouldn't have caught many of them probably, and I don't know whether that information is reliable, but Waverley considered it to be reliable enough to be part of the evidence base. This means that an appropriate assessment should be conducted, unless Waverley has better information now within the work they've been doing for the new local plan, but that hasn't been disclosed. And I'm surprised it's not in front of us. The requirement for an appropriate assessment, which isn't here, triggers paragraph 195 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which you're welcome to check, says that it disapplies, this is not sustainable development in the absence of an appropriate assessment, it disapplies the presumption in favour of sustainable development and the tilted balance of paragraph 11D of the MPPF 2024. If you look at footnote 68, that tells you the statutory obligations which are in Circular 06/2005. So there is protection in law against the cumulative impact of development, and according to Waverley's evidence, and I don't know how much it can be relied upon, that Allfold does have some protection from that, which it really should be looking at. If the committee members are minded to refuse on the solid grounds, I think, which have been talked about by Councillor Liz Townsend, then it would be a good idea to add no appropriate assessment, contrary to paragraph 63, sorry, regulation 63 of the Habitats Regulations 2017, as a reason for refusal. That reason could always be removed if the evidence base shows otherwise, but it would be a good idea to do so. There is a catch-all principle, which means that this law also applies at the reserved matters stage. So even if it were to go through tonight, then you would be able to catch it at a later stage, possibly. Of course, if it's refused on no appropriate assessment, then it would be very difficult for any inspector to overturn that. If something doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. So I would urge the residents and the planning committee to look at this carefully. I don't know precisely where Allfold stands on this, because I don't know whether we can rely on the information in Local Plan Part 1 Habitats Regulation Assessment, which wasn't a proper appropriate assessment, but nevertheless there is protection there which may apply. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but never least, Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. So tonight I am disappointed and saddened that another developer is trying to build more houses in Allfold, a village already under siege. The location is open fields, and page 1 of the officer's report describes the location. It mentions Guildford, 13 miles away, and its train station. How are you going to get there? It's a very long walk. Even if you drive through the rush hour traffic, it's between an hour and 90 minutes. The bus service to Guildford is poor. And if you're a nurse on a 7 to 7 shift at the Royal Surrey, it is impossible to use a bus to get there and back to Allfold. Previous applications in 2018 for 8 houses, which was refused due to the urbanising effect and loss of open field, would fail to preserve the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. It also added it would be in conflict with the Council's spatial strategy, contrary to policies SP2, RE1 and TD1, and retain policies D1 and D4. This is 9 times that size, so therefore 9 times the impact. What has changed? When it went to appeal, the inspector supported the grounds for refusal, stating it damaged the character and appearance of the area, pedestrian safety and living conditions of future occupiers. Page 35, policy SP2 of Local Plan Part 1 focused development on the 4 main settlements. The plan allows limited levels of development in areas such as Allfold. It uses the term sustainable development. Nothing in the officer's report, and strangely all on the planning portal, provides credible evidence to show this is sustainable. This is outside the settlement area, contrary to the supporting text of policy DM15, and it is clear we should avoid dependency on private vehicles. Page 35 mentions the convenience store, where we know that's not open. It talks about a daycare nursery. Well, I've never seen one. There is a location it uses for special needs, and it's for people from Sussex. Page 38, policy RE1 confirms countryside beyond the Greenbelt will be recognised and safeguarded in accordance with the NPPF. As a rural area, policy DM15 should recognise the natural beauty and undeveloped character which is intrinsic to the open countryside. This proposal should respond positively to the rural character and distinctive settlement, the clusters, the policy from DS1 from the neighbourhood plan for light pollution fails on both policies. The officer confirms it will result in a loss of undeveloped countryside and result in some inherent conflict with policies RE1 and DM15B. Is that acceptable? No, it isn't. Page 41 under biodiversity states that planning decisions should ensure that new development is appropriate for the location, taking into the likely effects. This fails the test because of the raw sewage that's pouring. Page 43 talks about ST1, sustainable transport. If you want to go south, there are 2 buses a week. So if you miss the bus back, you've got to wait several days before you can get back into Alfold. There's no shopping, there's no medical, there's no leisure facilities. The list goes on. To suggest otherwise is frankly laughable and insulting to the residents of Alfold. I will save the rest of my comments to the summing up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I've listened very carefully to the comments from the residents and from our officer. And it does concern me very greatly, this application, because once again, we're asked to provide more houses, no infrastructure, and we've seen it before, no infrastructure, no doctor's surgery, no shops. That's very evident from what's been said. School places, another one, transport, it goes on and on. Then you add to that the water situation. On page 47, Southern Water advises that additional foul and sewage flows may lead to increased risk of foul flooding from the sewer network, and any network reinforcement deemed necessary would be provided by Southern Water, but they can't say when. So what are we doing here? We know we need housing. That's very important. But why are we heaping more misery on the residents of Alfold to get that housing? Because they are the ones that will suffer. And I'm sorry, but I cannot support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We are living in a new regime than we were a few years back. And I have to say that with one exception, which I will come on to later, this regrettably ticks all the boxes for further development, given the government's new planning regime. It is not a protected landscape. It's very unusual in Waverley, of course. So normally I would, with great reluctance, have to say yes to this, knowing that we would be very, very vulnerable at appeal. However, there is one exception, and it's already been mentioned, and it is a very, very large exception indeed, and that is the sewage and water issue. And it is quite clear from the papers that although there's no clear plan. There's a plan actually to provide the infrastructure as far as water and sewage is concerned at all. Condition 28, proposed condition 28, talks about water, and it says the development shall not be occupied until confirmation has been provided that all water network upgrades are in place, I paraphrase, and that Thames Water and Southern Water sign up to this. It worries me a lot, this word occupied. It means you can actually build the development right down to the last brick before the water infrastructure that must be completed. And I can foresee in 2 or 3 years' time, there's the development and we still don't have the right infrastructure. And that's just an example there. So first of all, I'd be very keen to hear officers' comments, of course, before I come to a decision. But I'm minded to base my decision on what happens to water and sewage.
Thank you.
Yeah, just coming back, obviously as officers, we have to be guided by Southern Water and the way the water industry and investment in the water industry works, which doesn't align very comfortably with the way the planning system works and the way housing numbers are allocated to councils. And we are tasked to accommodate that development. So there is a lack of alignment, and that's set out for you in that report. Nevertheless, we are faced with a difficult situation where we don't have an objection from the statutory authorities that provide water and have a legal right to allow developers to connect to their systems. We have had examples of developments that have been allowed at appeal where inspectors have found it completely appropriate to put conditions on that say prior to occupation, because as you're all aware, the need only actually occurs at occupation. Building a house in itself doesn't put any pressure on infrastructure. It's the occupation of said, and hence the reason why the conditions are worded in that way. Councillor Munro, you are quite correct in pointing out that that runs the risk for a developer that they invest significant money building a house that could not potentially then be occupied because there isn't the infrastructure to support the use of that house. But nevertheless, that has been considered by PINS to be an acceptable approach to wording a condition. And indeed, you know, as officers, we would always advise that the need for infrastructure is only triggered at occupation, and hence we would, you know, have to agree with the wording of the condition in that way.
Thank you. Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. This is tricky on a number of areas. I have deep sympathy for the people of the area. I'm very, very conscious that there has been disproportionate development in that area compared with elsewhere. However, there is a very good reason for that disproportionate development, and that is that in terms of the land available, the land that is restricted elsewhere by virtue of being national landscape or green belt or other restrictions, just about the only available areas for development are in the east of the county and a small area around Farnham. So that is why there has been excessive development in Alfold. I'm very conscious of the issue of risk. We've heard about the importance of allowing for risk, but that includes the risk of appeals if we get it wrong. We've heard about the quantity of housing in the local plan, and this is way ahead of that. But the point is that the local plan was based on earlier government targets, which are now been greatly exceeded. We are way behind where we need to be. So on those kind of grounds, I would be inclined to support the application. But, the question of infrastructure is serious. I'm horrified to hear that this is a major problem right now. Against that, I'm also horrified to read in officers' notes that they recognize these problems, but, and I quote, because there exists the right to communicate with or connect to the sewer system, there is no grounds on which to refuse planning permission. If we refuse, we must have solid grounds to refuse on planning grounds, and that to me is a problem. The one area where I think I can completely agree that there is a ground to refuse is this matter of transport. there is no way, in my view, that this is genuinely a sustainable location. So that leaves me in a bit of a quandary. I want to refuse it. I would like to support it if infrastructure were in place, but it isn't. I'm horrified that it would seem that sewage is not sufficient. I'm not convinced by the proposed condition. I just don't trust the water companies. So that leaves me in a bit of a quandary. I would like to refuse. The only solid grounds on which I can see to refuse would be it's not a sustainable location. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. I was going to ask for clarification on a few things, SP2, for example, and I don't want to waffle too long, but I do want to clarify whether officers think they have credible evidence for that. I was also going to seek clarification on the Southern Water comment, because I think it's pretty standard that Southern Water don't object to any development on the grounds of network capacity. So by saying no objection from Southern Water, isn't that null and void? Because by standard, they don't do it anyway. And the other clarification point I wanted to seek was a comment by Alfold Parish Council on whether officers believe adequate consultation was actually done or not. Just to see the opinion there. But ultimately, again, I don't want to waffle too much, but I think as parish councillors, if the portfolio holder for housing is objecting to this application, what really are we to do?
Thank you.
And apologies, I half missed your first question. So would you mind awfully repeating it?
No, I did ramble. SP2, credible evidence.
So I'll just answer the next two and then I'll just come back to you on the first one. So in terms of the Southern Water, they have raised no objection. And I think, members, what you have to take from that is they are the statutory consultee. And if you were looking to refuse the application this evening based on sort of foul capacity, water capacity, then you're doing that in light of the fact that you do not have a statutory consultee that will be defending that reason for refusal, and therefore you would be relying on officers finding another expert witness to defend that reason for refusal. In terms of consultation, I note the comments that the parish council have made about the applicant's consultation. There is a requirement for us to consult in various forms under our statement of community involvement. However, we cannot dictate how applicants choose to engage with communities. So that is something sort of outside the planning authority's sphere of influence. And Phoebe, I know, I'm sorry, Councillor Sullivan, could you just expand a little bit on the first point that you said you waffled on too much, because now you've condensed it so far that I'm not quite sure what the question is.
SP2 limited levels of development, do officers think they have credible evidence?
Right. So in terms of the distribution of development, I think the difficulty that we have is that all the policies and the way the distribution of development and the spatial strategy is been framed in the local plan is based on a much lower housing number. And therefore, we're now in a situation where we have a quadrupled housing number. So we've gone from 590 approximately, I might have that one or other side of that number, to around 1440. So we've had this exponential increase in the housing number, which means that, you know, we're now planning in the preparation of the next local plan for that number, and the spatial distribution of the previous plan is now not aligned with the number of houses we need to spatially accommodate within the borough.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. This is an incredibly difficult. I don't think I've ever seen such an erroneous list of conditions on any application to date. I mean, this is a mountain for the developer to climb to get this through. And I'm not very good at predictions, but I would think this is, by the time these things are sorted, it's probably 5 years away at least before anything's going to go in the ground. And the reason I raise this is because I just want clarification, and I'm sorry I haven't cast myself across all the data that's going through at the moment. But as far as the local plan is concerned, will that have an influence in terms of providing infrastructure such as education establishments, shops, and the basic infrastructure that Allfold is going to need if it's going to support this development? I mean, the bottom line from me is that I feel, we are between a rock and a hard place. Central government is, through its figures, is saying that we've got to achieve these housing targets. And yes, we can, but we have to live and expect the occupants of Allfold to live in a civilised way. And that means that their sewerage is disposed of correctly, and that they have the right facilities around them for their families and their children. And I'm finding it very, very difficult here to come to a positive conclusion on this development, really just looking through a fog of not knowing what is going to happen. And I recognise, I know the Assistant Director of Planning will say, look, you've got to, what you've got in front of you, you have to approve this, or you look at this on the basis that these conditions will be satisfied and that this development will not go ahead unless these conditions, and they're reserved matters anyway, that unless they're satisfied. But it's, there's, to me, these conditions, there's too much here. I mean, it's huge. It's a huge mountain. But can I get any satisfaction as regards what, if we look 5 years down the track, what infrastructure could we expect to be coming into play that will make Allfold village, verging towards town, but make Allfold at least a location to live with the proper infrastructure in place?
So, members, as part of the local plan work that we are undertaking to prepare the next local plan, we will be looking at infrastructure needs across the borough, but that will be connected with future growth rather than backwards looking. I think it's inevitable that we will be identifying significant infrastructure deficits in certain areas that have experienced the type of growth that Allfold has, and we will look to underpin our spatial strategy with the infrastructure delivery for future development within the area. In terms of education, and I'll just use the two examples that you've given, it doesn't necessarily follow that because there's growth in an area that you automatically get a new primary or secondary school. It's the level of growth and where there's deficit in surrounding schools and very complicated pupil place planning. So members, I couldn't confirm to you or give you the assurance that because there's 90 houses built, there's a new primary school, because that simply would not be the case. In terms of shops, again, that would be underpinned by development in the future and would need to be part of a policy allocation that identifies the need for community facilities, which could include a shop. So all those things may be delivered by future growth that will come through the local plan. But that doesn't particularly help you this evening when, as you rightfully say, you've got an application before you, you don't know what the spatial distribution of growth will be in the next local plan, or what may come forward as part of the allocation work of the new local plan. So in the absence of, a crystal ball, you only have what you have before you this evening, which is the current local plan and the planning application for the quantum of development of this application. Members, it is quite normal to have a significant number of conditions with outline applications because by their nature they do not contain a significant amount of detail and therefore, that there will be, as is perfectly normal with outline applications for development of this scale, to have a significant number of issues that will need to be worked up in more detail as the approval of reserved matters scheme, the detailed scheme, is worked up.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do understand, as others have said, that this is a difficult one to decide on. Actually, if we don't have the 5-year housing supply, the officers have recommended it, and I fully understand the reasons why the officer can recommended it. And as the Waite speaker had said, we will have to face a planning appeal if we turn this down, and we won't have the 5 years housing supply to defend our situation. But listening to the objectors, the sewage thing is a complete horror story as far as I'm concerned. And listening to what our portfolio holder for planning has said, Councillor Townsend, whose job is to actually get as many houses developed in Waverley as possible, there doesn't seem to be much prospect of that problem being solved in the near future, because she's been trying to solve it for quite some time. And quite frankly, I think this application should go away and come back later when that problem has been solved. That may not be a proper planning argument, but that's what I feel about it. It would be totally wrong for us to approve this application, in my view. And there's some situations where it is worth taking a risk of going to appeal. I don't think something can be described as sustainable when there isn't an adequate water and sewage system, and all the other things that Councillor Dean has said in terms of lack of sustainability in this area. So I'm not going to support this application, and I would recommend to my colleagues not to either. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Denis, would you like to sum up?
Thank you very much. It's clear both Thames Water and Southern Water have both stated there is currently no available capacity for the development. Southern Water have even been clear to say additional foul and sewage flow may lead to increased risk of foul flooding from the sewer network. But this is happening now. For the past 4 weeks, for 24 hours, every single day, there have been 4 tankers in Loxford Road pumping out the station and the pipes to stop people's houses being flooded. Can you imagine the impact on residents' lives? This sewage is then transported as far as Slough to get rid of it. That's absolutely disgusting. What about the residents? When I visit the residents, I have to go in Wellington boots because often there's raw sewage in their gardens, so I can't get to the front door. Many of them have animals. So, I think last night in council, we discussed care to animals. Well, I know a resident who's moved out of her house since December because of flooding from another development that has gone into her garden because her dog is now becoming ill. What about the vulnerable residents? I've got residents who've got sewage pumping through the toilets, who can't use the toilets. I think it incredible that nowhere in any of the documentation it talks about the rights of the residents. I think the developer talked about saying, oh, we can make 100 people really, really happy living here. What about the people who live in houses who cannot enjoy their own houses? I think we should be refusing this. And the one thing I would say, if we do refuse this, I would think that a very strong refusal to include about the sewage and water provision and the unsustainability. I could go on for hours about what isn't sustainable. The schools, the shops, the electricity, the doctors, the pharmacies, you name it, I can go on about it. But I think people here know what it's like to live in a village. Sorry, I was waiting for you to finish. I think we've been let down by a planning system in the past. I think, as I say, residents have a right to enjoy their homes. We do need homes, but they need to be in a sustainable location, and they need to be in a location that has the infrastructure to deal with that increase. We do have a dropped curb from one of the developments, and we're very proud of that. But that's about it. And I can assure you there will not be a school, because I know from my role at County Council, there is absolutely no way. And all of those children will have to go to Gleeblands and they will have to go to Cranley. More vehicle travel. I don't think I need to say any more.
Thank you very much. So I beg your pardon for having a little chat while you were speaking, Councillor Venus, but it was just that our recommendation is to grant planning permission, but I detect that that's not going to get very far. Is there an alternative recommendation from the floor, please? Councillor White.
Are we able to, in our opinion, say that this is not a sustainable site? Or do we have to say why it's not a sustainable site?
If you do not want to grant, if you're minded to oppose, that would be your recommendation with reasons.
Are you saying that would be my recommendation, or are you saying that is a...
If you do not wish to grant, if the committee does not wish to grant, then obviously they would want to oppose, but there have to be reasons.
Right. And my reason is that, in my opinion, it's not a sustainable site. Do we have to say exactly which items create that situation where, in our opinion, it's not a sustainable site?
Firstly, do you want to oppose?
Personally, yes. And I think other members on the floor do. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
So, so members, in terms of the sustainability argument, that is one that's been well rehearsed, and this is just giving you the information. And obviously, members, you're aware that most of the development in Oldfield has been allowed via the appeal system, and that is an issue that has been well rehearsed through previous appeals. Though, you know, it is open to members to choose to use that as a reason for refusal. Members, I think some of the other matters that I've heard that you have concerns about, or through public speakers, is the actual relationship of the development to the settlement boundary, i.e. its countryside. We've heard a lot as well about the impact on wastewater. And members, I think there has been one suggestion around transport, but again, just as a matter of fact, you do not have an objection from the county council as the highway authority. So you may want to reflect on whether you think that is the most sustainable reason for refusal for you to use.
Councillor Sullivan and then Councillor Steiger.
I would like to second Councillor White's objection on the grounds that it's outside the settlement boundary.
So, members, just so that we're clear on that reason for refusal, and I'm sure members there are other reasons that you may want to be adding before you take a vote on this. So members, are you suggesting therefore that the reason for refusal should be framed around the fact that the site is outside the defined settlement boundary of Oldfold and is located within open countryside, and therefore the proposed development on an unallocated greenfield site would lead to an urbanising impact and the erosion of landscape character, which would have significant harm to the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, and would be contrary to policies.
There are a few speakers, Councillor Steiger and then Councillor Munro.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues is around water and sewage, and the issue, as you pointed out, is that the statutory sort of the Southern Water say they have no objection, whereas in practice, I mean, we can see there's already big issues. And would it be possible that we can defer and ask the statutory body to actually prove that they will be able to, you know, actually guarantee this a bit more? Because at the moment, if they're not able to provide the sewage and water, you know, supply at the moment, then I think, would that be a valid reason where we can say, well, if you can't do it now, how are you going to do it after all these houses are built?
So just in response to that, and I think at the moment we're trying to frame the reasons for refusal because we've got a proposer and a seconder, but just in response to your question, Southern Water and Thames Water's position is legally the developer has a right to connect and therefore they have to create the capacity, but they need the certainty of a permission to enable that to happen. Now that doesn't align very well with the planning system and the discussions we've had this evening. So members, I would suggest that a deferral for Southern Water to repeat that may not get us any further in this discussion.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't think a refusal on the ground is outside the settlement boundary is a strong one at all. It would have worked 4 years ago, I think, but it won't work now. To my mind, and surely from the debate, the killer is the lack of infrastructure, in particular water and sewage. And I would say we have grounds for refusing in that the assurance that the water and sewage problems will be sorted are simply not plausible or credible. The language needs tidying up slightly. And for me, then, that is sufficient grounds. I'm also in evidence, we can point to the current situation in Alford, where there has been an enormous amount of development and frankly, the infrastructure has not kept pace at all. And it is logical, therefore, if they can't even sort out what's happening on the ground now, how can we have any confidence that they will sort it out in future?
So
I don't know whether that can be massaged into a planning refusal, but I jolly well hope it can.
So let me have a go then. I think members are suggesting that a reason for refusal that they would vote on would be that the proposed development would result in increased pressure on infrastructure, specifically resulting from an increased demand on wastewater facilities in the area where the existing infrastructure is insufficient to accommodate the needs of the new development. It has not been demonstrated that the required upgrades to the network infrastructure can be undertaken to serve the development and that the development would not result in a detrimental impact on the water infrastructure for the existing residents and users. And therefore the proposal would be contrary to specific policies that I can play back to you.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could add to that, actually, you said the infrastructure is not sufficient to accommodate the new development. It's fairly clear it's not able to accommodate the existing developments, actually. And that's the point, actually, and they haven't been able to do anything about it. In fact, they acknowledge, they say inability, this is their comment, inability of the existing water network infrastructure to accommodate the needs of the development. But as I say, it's more than that. They're not even accommodating the needs of the existing residents. And there's no evidence they're going to do anything about it, from what we're told. The other thing I'd like to add, and as I say, Council of Towns have been trying to get them to do it for years. So it's unlikely they're going to do it in the future or in the near future. In terms of transport, actually, when Councillor Danis was talking about transport and so on, he specifically pointed out that the nearest school is a long way away. So surely it's not just the fact that there's very few buses and that sort of thing. Surely it's also, it would be difficult to, we've got more children, there's no local school, there's not going to be a local school. And the children are going to have to travel to wherever the existing children from also go to, and that's more of them. So I'm not so concerned about there will be a few more cars on the road. It's the fact you've got more children having to travel. So at this location is not sustainable in terms of more children having proper education nearby. I don't know if that can be brought into a planning objection at all. Maybe it can't, but I'm very supportive of many of the things that Councillor Danis said, actually. Thank you.
So just to advise the committee on the education point, I think many of you will be aware that across Surrey, as is the case in most counties, that children will travel significant distance to schools, particularly secondary schools. So members, I think that might be a very difficult reason for refusal. But maybe coming back to the point on the wastewater, members, we couldn't frame a reason for refusal that was based on the impact of the existing residents, but because we've got to look at the impact of the proposed development. But I think what I was suggesting in the words that I read out was the impact of the, let me reread it to you. And then it has not been demonstrated that the required upgrades to the network infrastructure can be undertaken to serve the development, and that the development would not result in a detrimental impact to the wastewater for existing residents and users. So it's that impact in the inability to address the uplift would further impact on the existing residents. And that would be a way of framing the issue that has been described to you this evening in the context of assessing the impact of this development.
Thank you. There are two other speakers, Councillor Keane and then Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. And this is possibly nothing, well, it isn't anything to do with planning, but one of the things that seriously do worry me is that we've got this sewage in people's gardens and coming up their toilets and everything else. Surely to God, this is a serious health issue as well, because, you know, if you've got sewage in the garden and you've got young children and they can't get out in the garden, or if they do, they could be sick. And that really worries me, because we shouldn't have a situation like this in this modern day and age.
Thank you, Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. I've been listening carefully to all the possible grounds for refusal. Generally speaking, I'm sympathetic to these objections. However, given that the statutory consultees have not objected, given the limitations on the refusal on sewage grounds, I'm reluctantly coming to the conclusion that there are no viable grounds for refusal that would stand up to an appeal. And my view, tentatively, is that we have no choice but to support it, but possibly ask the officers to look again at the conditions and possibly strengthen them. I think we really are dependent on those conditions. I don't see how we can refuse on planning grounds. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor White, beg your pardon. And then we're going to call it.
Yes, okay. I think for me where this is going is that we want to put a stake in the ground and say this is enough. We have evidence of problem. I totally respect the Assistant Director's comments on this and understand the situation. The question I've got is really a housekeeping one. If we go to appeal, we're going to be spending community money to pay for the cost of the appeal. Unfortunately, we've already had a situation with the same developer, as everybody knows, in Farnham. And that has resulted in costs to the community. If this goes forward with the wording that Assistant Director is suggesting, and it goes to appeal, if there is then evidence, and this could be in, I don't know, 18 months' time, a year, 18 months or whatever, I don't know, and there is evidence that comes forward to the inspector that the statutory authority will and is showing that he can provide the facility, the volume of facility required, and therefore the appeal is upheld, would that in some way mitigate the costs of the community on that basis that, you know, time and so on is proven that it can be dealt with?
So, members, if we go to appeal, then we bear the costs of our own activity connected with that appeal. If we turn up at an appeal and are not able to provide any form of evidence to underpin our reasons for refusal, whatever those reasons might be, then we do run the risk of cost as well. We similarly can claim costs against the other side if they turn up to an appeal, I don't know, and they hadn't produced a statement or hadn't produced any witnesses. So costs is a two-way thing. And also there's another dynamic in the PINs also, the planning inspectorate also have the ability to seek costs from local authorities or appellants for sort of unreasonable behaviour. That's not their behaviour as in unreasonable, they don't have the evidence to underpin their position.
Thank you. I understand that. The question that I'm asking is, we've more or less said this, I think, between us, that we recognise the need for housing supply. What we're asking for is to buy time to allow the infrastructure to catch up with the development that's being imposed on Allfold. And really what I'm saying is that our refusal tonight could well lead to appeal, but will, in your opinion, would the PINS inspector say, well, okay, this is reasonably the local community asking for a delay so that the statutory authority is able to prove that they can provide this, the infrastructure that's required? Will that hold any ground at all and mitigate costs to us on that basis, that when it goes to appeal, yes, they have proven they can do it, so everybody's happy?
So when it goes to appeal, the planning inspector will look at the planning merits of the scheme and make a planning decision based on what is presented to him or her by the appellant and the local planning authority. So that will be the basis. I can't see a situation where by going to appeal and therefore causing a time lapse before this matter is considered, the infrastructure providers are going to invest in infrastructure for growth that isn't there, because part of the way and the nuances around this relationship and friction between the planning system and the water industry is that the water industry want the certainty that development is going to happen to then put investment in the infrastructure to support that development. And in the absence of that certainty, they then don't invest in that area and will invest somewhere else.
So a bit like chicken and egg. We have had Councillor Munro, he's suggested grounds. Yep.
So can I just come in with a couple of things and add the policies, but also members, if you are minded to refuse this evening, then you would also need to be adding a reason for refusal relating to the lack of the 106 contributions, and that would run along the grounds that in the absence of a section 106, because there is none, to secure the provisions for healthcare contributions, highway infrastructure mitigation and contributions, and suitable management arrangements for the public realm area within the site, the proposal fails to mitigate the impact of the development and therefore would be contrary to policy ICS1, ST1 of the local plan and ANPTT1 of the neighbourhood plan and the MPPF. And then the second reason is in the absence of a 106 to secure the provisions of policy compliant affordable housing, the proposal fails to create a sustainable, inclusive and mixed community contrary to the requirements of AHN1 of the local plan and the Waverley Affordable Housing Supplementary Policy Document and the MPPF. And then with your third, the reason for refusal that I've already suggested may be worded in a way, the conditions that would be attached, the policies that would be attached to that is the proposal will be contrary to policy ICS1 of the local plan, policy DM1, which members also does refer in little a DM1 of the avoiding significant harm to the health and amenities of occupiers of nearby land and buildings. So it's also looking at that impact on existing residents, and DM3 of the local plan and the MPPF.
Everybody clear? Yep. So the recommendation is now to refuse on the grounds just outlined. So when your lights show, please vote, remembering that if you're voting for, it's green. If you're voting against, it's red and on the right. So if you are in favour of refusing, you are obviously voting for. The proposal is, your proposal is to refuse. So if you're voting in favour of refusal.
Sorry, Chair. The results are 8 in favour of refusal and 2 against.
So that is carried. So should we have a 5-minute break, everybody? Well, people can go home. Okay, Claire? Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We're going to restart. Our next application is WA 2025-001 00031, Starcross Farm, Green Lane, Tilford. And over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So the second application under consideration at committee is Starcross Farm, which is for the erection of 5 dwellings with associated landscaping following demolition of the existing dwelling and equestrian buildings. Since the agenda was published, we've received further representations, and these representations have been added to the planning register this week, and an update sheet has been circulated setting out the council's position on matters raised. This application has been brought before the planning committee given the number of comments contrary to the officer's recommendation. Starcross Farm is situated 0.8 kilometres from the northern boundary of the Tilford settlement area. The red line site comprises a 6-bedroom residential dwelling with integrated 2-bedroom staff unit, stables, Dutch barns and sand school with 2 points of access off Green Lane. The site is sat directly adjacent to Redleaf Nursery to the west. To the south, outside the red line, the applicant also owns the wider land holding, which is approximately 88 acres, which includes 2 barn structures with informal access off Tilford Street to the west and off Whitmead Lane to the east. The immediate character is rural in nature. Properties in the wider area are largely detached to set back from the lane on spacious verdant plots. So this is the view of the site looking southeast towards the main dwelling and the associated stables. So as discussed in the report, the large 1960s farmhouse, you've got the sort of asymmetric roof line, and it's particularly noted within both the submitted LVIA and by the Surrey Hills National Landscape Advisor as a visual detractor in the wider landscape. The structures do not fit in with their surrounding context, being mid-century additions in a linear arrangement. This is the rear of the site, looking northeast with the 2-storey farmhouse in the centre. You have an enclosed pool house building in the top left of the picture and a large single-storey outliers to the right of the picture. So here you're in the centre of the site. So those right pictures, you've got views there, those are the adjoined stable buildings with the white render. And then the Dutch barn to the east, which as you can see has gone through, has had fenestration changes with the addition of the stable doors and the overhangs. So in views outside the site, the primary zone of influence includes locations along Green Lane, Tilford Street and Whitmead Lane. In terms of Green Lane, these are the LVIA summer views. The existing bank along the road does largely screen views of the site in summer months, both looking east and west down the lane. And so you move into the winter months and you can see the site is relatively well screened, but you can see the glimpses of the roof lines and the white render of the main building become slightly more apparent. Looking down, I've got my cursor there. So you're down the southeast is Whitmead Lane, and that's looking northwest across the field in the winter months. And you can just make out there the 2-storey farmhouse, but it is shielded by vegetation on the roadside boundary. And then to the, this is Tilford Street. From the southwest looking northeast, and you can just make out the 2-storey farmhouse. In the foreground, you've got Redleaf Nursery with the glass houses. Overall, the site itself is a well-contained site with a very limited primary zone of influence. You've got some watercolour site plan comparisons of the existing site layout at the top with the proposed site layout at the bottom. There has been a focus by the architecture practice to remove the existing linear pattern and create a layout that is more informal and ad hoc, reflective of more traditional farmstead typologies of the Surrey Hills area. So you've got the illustrative site plan again showing the layout, but also the extensive planting. You've got the wildflower lawn here to the northwest, and the ecological appraisal notes around 42 additional tree plantings, which would be further detailed in the submission of a landscape plan, which has been conditioned. The agricultural land to the south and the proposed use of the site is clearly delineated. There will be this which forms part of the landscape strategy. So here you've got the illustrative aerial plans of the development. Each dwelling has been inspired by a cluster of farmstead buildings. So you've got dwelling 1 here in the farmhouse typology, dwelling 2 in the stable typology, and dwellings 3, 4, and 5 in more of a barn typology. And we can go through each of those in turn later. And the comparative plan, so this is looking northeast from the rear of the site. This is looking take from the design axis, and you have the views there looking southeast near the westernmost access from Green Lane, showing the proposed farmhouse style dwelling and timber garage in the foreground. A next comparative site plan looking from the rear of the site. And then this is finally a view from the northwest across the agricultural land towards the site, as we'll discuss. The traditional materials, the brick, the timber cladding, the clay tiles are more recessive and less intrusive than the existing white rendered buildings, which Surrey Hills National Landscape Advisor noted results in the existing buildings being particularly conspicuous and unattractive features. So the footprint comparisons between the existing, you've got the existing above and the proposed below. As discussed in the Greenbelt section of the report, the proposal will result in an 18% reduction in built footprint on the site. So this is the farmhouse style dwelling, which will be sited in a similar position. You've got a rectangular form, use of multiple materials, including clay roof tiles, red brick, lead dormer roof cheeks with feature lintels. You've got dwelling 2, which is uses similar materials, and you've got the material schedule there, which sort of goes through the variety, which provides dwellings that aren't homogeneous. It gives the impression of like a farmstead, that such buildings have developed over time. You've got dwelling 3 there, dwelling 4, each with their own, as I say, tiles and different types of brick, and dwelling 5. So in closing, the main matters for consideration will be, amongst other matters raised in the report, impact on the Greenbelt and the Surrey Hills National Landscape. As discussed in the report, officers find the proposal meets exemption paragraph 154G of the NPPF for the redevelopment of previously developed land, which would not cause substantial harm to the openness of the Greenbelt. We've discussed the issue of previously developed land extensively within the report and in the update sheet. The site proposed here is PDL as defined in Annex 2 of the NPPF. The proposal results in an 18% reduction in built footprint and a breakup of built form on site that would be of visual benefit to the openness of the site. Balanced against the limited spatial openness harm from additional residential units, overall the proposal is neutral in its effects and would therefore meet the relevant exemption. On national landscape, we've gone through all manner of things in the report, the use of the wider agricultural land holding, on light spill, on design, on landscaping of the site, on the visual receptors into the site, and have concluded the proposal would result in a medium long-term slight benefit to landscape character. Overall, officers do not identify any material harms from the proposal when there are a number of public benefits that are listed at the end of the report. In full, the proposal accords with the NPPF and the Council's local plans. Officers are recommending approval of this planning application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. We have 6 speakers. The first is David Evans. Mr. Evans, you have 4 minutes from when you start.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm a planning solicitor and I represent Janet Arm, who operates and lives at
Redleaf Nursery immediately adjacent to the application site. She's lived there for nearly 40 years and has great concerns about this application, including, but by no means limited to, the fact that she feels it is overdevelopment in the green belt. I should say, having reviewed this, she is completely right to do so, and it will explain why by reference to the site's planning history and planning policy, including the definition of the term previously developed land, often abbreviated to PDL, as defined in Annex 2 of the current version of the National Planning Policy Framework, as interpreted by officers. And to that end, Ms. Sohn has kindly printed out a series of photographs which I think helps explain the history of the site and why officers have respectfully, I should add, misdirected themselves on the extent of the application site, which can be regarded as PDL. Very brief, and I believe that's been circulated to all members. Brilliant. Very briefly, it is a core part of the applicant's case that the entire application site is PDL. And central to that assertion is that the redundant agricultural buildings and the eastern part of the site and the former Sands School have been used for equestrian purposes for a sufficiently long time so that such use is now lawful and so can be regarded as PDL. Whereas if they were in agricultural use or abandoned, they cannot be regarded as such. And now I'd like to take you to these photographs. On the first page, the first photograph shows the site as it existed in September 2003, before any part of the site was used for any equine purpose. The second photograph was taken in May 2009, and that shows that there had been some equine activity. And you can see on the right-hand side of that photo, a sand school has been erected. And we believe that was built unlawfully, we should add, by a Mr. Simpson, who used the site, or that part of the site, for equine purposes for a 3-year period between 2004 and 2007. And that's well short of the 10-year period that such uses are required to be used for before they can become lawful. The third photograph on the top of page 2 there this shows the site has existed in June 2013, long after Mr. Simpson had vacated the site. And you can see that the sand school has started to blend into the landscape. And that's important because that's the only evidence, so far as we can tell, that the applicant has submitted which demonstrates that equine purpose was going on for the extensive period that they claim. In my experience, I've done this for a long time, I've been a planning solicitor for a long time, a single photograph like that is far short of what an applicant is usually required to support a successful certificate of lawfulness application. The fourth photograph on the bottom of the second page shows the sand school entirely blended in, and therefore has it been abandoned. Now, I'm going to rush this because I'm very short of time, but the final photograph, final page, shows the site as it exists today, and on the plan below, there's 2 marks, A and B. They are in entirely open land. They cannot be regarded as curtilage or PDL. They've never had a structure on them, and they have therefore not previously developed land, contrary to the officer's assertion, and therefore this application should be rejected because it is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Thank you, and sorry for overrunning.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Our next speaker is Sir Andrew Carter. You two have 4 minutes from when you start.
Right, this is on, isn't it? Yes. One of the main thrusts of the planning officer's report is that this development aids Waverley's housing target. We're all aware that the government is quite rightly pushing for more affordable dwellings to be built that can be put on sale or available to rent to younger people of limited means or to get on the housing ladder. However, you address this application, it does not meet that requirement. Put simply, we believe this is an executive compound designed primarily as a weekend retreat or holiday home for members of one family. Note the way the houses are clustered together without adequate garages or gardens. No developer hoping to sell or to very expensive, over £1 million houses would design them in such a way, which makes us wonder whether the units will ever be put up to sale. In no way, shape or form does it address any of the housing needs that Tilford may have. A particular objection for many is the traffic issue. Green Lane is narrow, and although Surrey Highways request a wider visibility spray from those coming to the site, this is not the issue. The issue is actually the limited visibility of vehicles coming around the corner over the brow of the hill, finding slow-moving traffic entering or exiting the development. Neighbours know the speeds at which traffic races along the lane and have a genuine concern that it is proposed is highly dangerous and that young families on the way to a school, and there are 2 schools very nearby, will have no time to react. We also are concerned about light pollution and the visual impact. And I noticed in the pictures that came up earlier, those pictures were actually taken at a very low angle. If you stand at a normal person's height, it doesn't appear like that. The report states on page 3 that all the many objections will be addressed in the ensuing pages. There are 23 valid objections issues listed, but only 22 are dealt with. The 23rd, precedent would be set, tellingly perhaps is not addressed at all. We submit that this is a central and vital topic. If this development is permitted, then no derelict barns in Waverley would be saved from similar applications. As a side note, the whole report appears to totally ignore all objections from local residents in favour of the applicant, and plans have not been supported by anyone else. The close neighbours were from the start kept totally in the dark as far as the applicant was concerned. There was zero communication or consultation before the first applications was put in to Waverley site a year ago, complete with over 100 pages of plans and long reports. Since then, a further 60 plus plans, reports or amendments have been added, but again, there has been no attempt to contact neighbours, even though the applicant will have been aware of all the issues and objectives. Moreover, communication via the planning office seems to be delivered on a just-in-time basis, particularly when the original plans were listed, leaving no time in which to consider what has been proposed, and subsequent amendments have never been advised or explained. In conclusion, it is important to note that none of the close neighbours prima facie have any objection to Starcross Farm being redeveloped, and perhaps on the basis that reasonable people would accept reasonable propositions, except, of course, it is not and has never been, and I've lived there for over 40 years, an equestrian property. It is as agricultural use. Surely a limited development on what we hope we have explained is a much smaller, legitimate, pleasingly developed site is more suitable, particularly in the green belt and an area of outstanding natural beauty. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Anthony Frendo. And you two have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members. My name is Anthony Frendo, and I'm the applicant's planning consultant. The proposal falls within paragraph 154G of the MPPF, which supports the redevelopment of previously developed land, which I'll also abbreviate to PDL, for residential use, provided there is no substantial harm to openness. The principal issue raised by objectors is whether the site qualifies as PDL. On behalf of the neighbour, as you just heard, Keystone Law have argued in one of their letters submitted to the council that any building or use which has become lawful through the passage of time can never qualify as PDL. However, that is not what the MPPF says. Annex 2 requires land to have been lawfully developed. Development which becomes lawful through statutory immunity is lawful for planning purposes. It is not a lesser form of lawfulness. Richard Ground, KC, addresses this directly and confirms there is no legal basis for excluding development that has become lawful through the passage of time from the definition of PDL. Recent appeal decisions support that position. The appeal decision Keystone Law also rely upon in their most recent letter does not establish the principle they suggest. The application is supported by a site-specific land use assessment by Bourne Rural and a legal opinion by Richard Ground KC, both confirming the established equestrian use of the barns and associated land. The applicant family have owned the site for approximately 50 years and have first-hand knowledge of its use. Keystone Law also suggests the Sand School has been abandoned. Abandonment is a very high legal threshold and requires more than a period of inactivity or natural overgrowth. The submitted material clearly demonstrates that this part of the site has been used in association with the equestrian barns and forms part of the same planning unit. Taken together, the evidence, legal advice and appeal decisions provide a clear and robust basis for concluding that the site constitutes PDL. Turning to openness, the proposal reduces the built footprint, introduces no increase in height and redistributes built form more sensibly across the site. There is no substantial spatial or visual harm. The development therefore complies with paragraph 154G of the MPPF. Although outside the settlement boundary, the site is not isolated. It sits adjacent to existing residential development, and the redevelopment of PDL is supported in the council's spatial strategy. It is also a modest 4 additional homes. In relation to ecology and wildlife, Surrey Wildlife Trust and Natural England have reviewed the application and raised no objection. The proposal delivers 4 additional family-sized homes appropriate to the site and its context. The council's housing evidence confirms a pressing need for this type of accommodation, and the scheme responds directly to that need in accordance with local plan policy AHN3. The siting, scale and orientation of the buildings ensure there will be no adverse impact on neighbouring properties in accordance with local plan policy DM5. Highway matters have been fully assessed. The access arrangements and level of traffic generation are acceptable and will not prejudice highway safety. Surrey County Council raised no objection. Turning to the planning balance, the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies, meaning permission should be granted unless the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. These proposals will deliver the effective redevelopment of PDL with strong policy support at national and local level, an uplift in housing supply at a time of acute need, visual improvements through contextual design and landscape-led approach, biodiversity net gain, economic benefits during construction and once the homes are occupied, and SIL contributions towards infrastructure. There are no harms which significantly and demonstrably outweigh those benefits. The planning balance therefore strongly favours approval. For those reasons, and having regard to the officer's recommendation, I respectfully ask the committee to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Mr. Andrew Watson. And you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. My name is Andrew Watson of Roddick Davidson, the architects for the proposal. Owned by the applicant's family for approximately 50 years, Starcross Farm is a home that has been much loved but is sadly no longer fit for purpose. The existing house, as you've heard, was designed in the 1960s and does not sit comfortably within the surrounding rural context due to its asymmetrical roof forms and an abundance of white cladding. The applicant is aware that phrases such as "scar on the landscape" have been used to describe the property over the years, and this sentiment is reinforced by Indigo Landscape's visual impact studies that demonstrate the existing property stands out when viewed from near and far due to its bright and uncharacteristic appearance. In plan, the orthogonal arrangement of the existing buildings is atypical and does not reflect a traditional farmstead layout that could be found elsewhere in the area or indeed in English heritage or Surrey design guidance. Whilst it has been much loved by the family, the existing property does not contribute positively to the local area or wider visual context. With this in mind, the proposal aims to deliver a new home for the applicant's family, along with 4 additional high-quality dwellings, arranged as an organic cluster reflecting a farmhouse, stable block and barn typologies. Care has been taken to design a scheme that is sympathetic to the rural character, preserving the openness of the greenbelt and enhancing the site's appearance within the Surrey Hills national landscape. As a result, the proposal sees a 236 metres² reduction in built footprint across the site. Unlike the existing buildings, the proposal is inspired by the characteristics of vernacular farmsteads as documented by English heritage and more specifically local guidance such as Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guidance and Management Plan. Other vernacular influence design measures include the introduction of varying building volumes, roof pitch angles, ridge heights, all of which match or sit below the existing heights, and the non-perpendicular orientation of buildings that often frame a central courtyard. Proposed materials include handmade bricks, clay tiles, and silvered timber cladding, all of which intend to soften the appearance and purposefully move away from the existing materiality. Architecture aside, landscape falls at the heart of the scheme, and it's worth noting that the proposal sees an overall reduction in hard surfacing and, in turn, an increase in planting that will enhance on and off-site ecology. Importantly, the proposal has been reviewed by Surrey Wildlife Trust and Natural England, both of whom raised no objection. In terms of visual impact, the application site is contained within a very limited zone of visual influence and is surrounded by woodland. Views of the proposal would be almost entirely restricted to Green Lane to the north, with only fleeting glimpses from the east and west boundaries. In distant views, where available, the replacement of a bright white linear form with a clustered collection of recessive buildings would be far more in keeping with the surrounding context. Regarding landscape character, there would be substantial positive effects on the character of built form, and once established, the significant tree planting proposed would absorb buildings into their setting and further screen views of the proposal. In summary, we believe the proposal is a considered and sensitive addition to the area that provides a betterment in terms of appropriateness to site, biodiversity, sustainability, materiality, and visual impact on the national landscape. At its core, it reflects the applicant's desire to create high-quality family homes from which they can add to their already fond memories of the property and local area. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have two other speakers. We have Councillor Nigel Morland. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Morland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. My name is Nigel Morland and I'm from the Tilford Parish Council, who have lodged some objections to the proposal, which I just want to quickly summarise. We said that we felt that the site was being overdeveloped, and that is in the context of the protections covering this area and the fact that it is outside the main area of Tilford itself. So this would be a cluster, as has been referred to, of high-value buildings in a suburban style arrangement outside the Tilford main area and not really in character with the rest of the countryside around. We also raised some other objections, and it was refreshing to find that they were agreed to by our friendly planning officers. So we said that we felt that it didn't meet the needs of Tilford, and your own planning officers agree that it doesn't comply with SHMA in that the mix of buildings is out of kilter with the West Surrey HMA. And so, for example, that is meant to comprise, any development is only meant to have 20% of 4+ beds, whereas this would have 60% of 4+ beds. It is then dismissed on the basis that you can catch up elsewhere without any supporting evidence whatsoever that your current level of building is making up the difference. We also pointed out that we felt that there was not enough affordable housing, and again, your own planning officers agreed with that and then dismissed it on the basis of affordability, which is not something I'm qualified to understand, but it just seems a rather easy way out of actually meeting the needs of the residents of the parish council. We also raised the question of traffic, and I do still feel that that is an issue, not least because I believe there's not quite an appreciation not only of the traffic that is coming to two schools there at some speed, but also since the increase in traffic to the local Ahmadiyya Muslim mosque at Islamabad, that can mean up to 800 cars, I understand, coming at peak times, and most of them are coming, or a lot of them are coming down Green Lane because they're coming down from London and from the A3, and Green Lane is a natural cut through and is also being, a lot of those cars, or quite a number of those cars, are driven by people who don't actually have experience of driving on the left-hand side, because there's a lot of German, Belgian, and other cars from the continent coming. So I just think that that is an accident waiting to happen on that front. We also questioned some of the measurements, and we also, at the meeting, stated that we weren't aware of any continuing equestrian use beyond the 3 years that Freddie Simpson was there. And I personally attested to that. I'm a horse rider in the area. I know the area very well. I knew Freddie Simpson pretty well. And no way that he was there for any longer than the 3 years that's been referred to. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've heard some of the problems of this site, and I do think that there's quite a problem here actually with differences of opinion. Certainly on the major issue here, which is the Greenbelt and the Surrey Hills. That depends upon the definition of previously developed land. We've heard tonight two different opposing views, and I don't think that, to be honest, that the 8 members of the committee here are in a position to be able to work out for themselves which of those is true. I just don't know how, you know, however long they spend talking about it, there is no way that we can get into a debate that will end up with the facts in front of them so that the 8 members know exactly how they should go with this, because that determines how they should vote. Similarly, we've got to the issue of the reopening of the access, the original access, which is fairly dangerous. And without a site visit, residents can't look at that. The existence of the sand school and the how long that was in use for, that's an issue again which needs to be thrashed out and sorted, and the councillors can't do that here tonight. And the issue which I'll address, because the others have all been addressed here, which is it or is it not sustainable development? Well, you know, we've got an officer update sheet in front of us here, which says that effectively that Waverley disagrees with the law. In the summary, a matters raised by Councillor Hyman on the update sheet, where I refer to paragraph 20 of the report regarding the Weldon Heaths, which says that I say the council cannot conclude no significant effect on the Weldon Heath Spa without an appropriate assessment, because the law says that's the whole purpose of the law, is that you carry out an assessment so that you can reach a conclusion. And what Waverley are saying is that we don't have to. We've reached a conclusion of no significant effect. We've excluded all this development and virtually every other development around the Weldon Heaths from the in combination effect, which the statutory obligations at footnote 68 of the MPPF blindly, it says perfectly that you can't do. It says the assessment is not confined to proposals that require planning permission, but includes all relevant plans and projects. All relevant plans and projects means you can't exclude them from an in combination assessment, but that's precisely what officers have done. Members do need to know where the truth lies, because they're being told things that, and a lot of the things which I feel that are being told from the officer report, officers need to question those seriously. I mean, if you want to question the SBA issue, you ask, how can officers conclude no significant effect without conducting appropriate assessment? You know, that's the whole purpose. You ask, how can you, the decision makers, be sufficiently convinced to be able to conclude no significant in combination effect if you haven't got an appropriate assessment in front of you? And when officers are saying, you're not going to get one, we're not going to let you be able to determine that. You ask, why haven't we got an appropriate assessment in front of us? That's after 20 years And I've brought this up so many times over the years, and we still don't have an appropriate assessment, but Waverley just ignore it as though the law doesn't apply to them. In 2018, after our local plan part 1 was adopted in February 2018, 2 months after that, the judgment was ruling in C32317, People over Wind and Sweetman, showed that and determined that the approach taken by Waverley and other councils and by Natural England and the Planning Inspectorate and government was unlawful, just ignoring the need for appropriate assessment, a complete appropriate assessment of mitigation, completely unlawful, but the council has not changed their ways, despite the fact that the government guidance in the MPPG says that competent authorities have got to change their ways. That was from 2019, but haven't done so. So this is not sustainable development, because paragraph 195 of the MPPF says that if there's no appropriate assessment on habitats applications, then it overrides the lack of 5-year housing land supply. The tilted balance and the presumption in favour of sustainable development do not apply because there's no appropriate assessment. Now, you need to check whether that's true or not, because the officers are saying I'm wrong, whereas the court decisions in 2018 prove that I've been right about this all along. So I would ask that to sort out all these issues respectfully.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman.
You defer.
That's your
Thank you.
time. Councillor Monroe, you are the last speaker.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm one of the ward councillors for this area. I think, this is a very sensitive area, as I think has been amply demonstrated, and a very much well-loved area, as proved by the number of well-founded and thoughtful objections. I think it's common ground that this actual site could do with improvement. It served its purpose and it's time for it to go, but to be replaced by something better. It's a really sensitive site, this. It is protected up to the hilt as far as it possibly can be. And also what I don't think came across quite so well, it is a very prominent site. Green Lane is not flat. It goes up to the centre where the site is and then down again. So from at least 3 sides, it is on a hill. So we've got to be extra specially careful that now there is this opportunity to improve it, that we take that. And I don't feel, unfortunately, I think an opportunity is being missed here. As Sir Andrew Carter said, and I certainly agree with him, that there is a good development, my words, struggling to get out here, but I don't think this is it. I accept that the floor space is slightly less or the same, but the actual spatial distribution is very different, and I think it will look much more obtrusive. And if you looked at the photograph, the actual site of it, it still, even with the trees, which of course aren't there yet, they will take a long time to cover the site, but even with the trees, to me there's too many vertical lines, and it's not, I believe, in sympathy with the buildings on either side of Green Lane and slightly further afield. So it's overdevelopment in my view. Five major substantial properties to replace one is too much in this highly sensitive area. I think the other concern that I do have, and I won't mention all of them, I agree with what has been said up to now, but where's the affordable housing here? It is in scope, apparently, and we hear that for one reason or another, I think on cost grounds, affordable housing is not proposed. I do believe that is a mistake. We should seize every opportunity we possibly can to do this. So it is a balance. I won't insult colleagues' intelligence by saying it's clear cut, because it isn't. But I do think this application should be refused on the grounds that we can tease out a much better development, which is more in sympathy with this highly loved and highly protected countryside. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, members, the floor is yours. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. I think the site looks great. I would actually love for all applications to be built under the theme of farmstead. I really like that. I like the design. I like the materials used. I think the architecture and the architectural plan is incredibly beautiful, in my opinion. But as a building looking ugly cannot be a reason for refusal, a pretty design cannot be a reason to approve. So I'm just going to seek some clarifications, if that's okay. Can we get clarification on whether we can push back on 154G at all within the planning committee? It's easier for me to do one question, or I'll do a few. And can I also get officers' opinion on whether these houses will actually be sold on the open market, albeit I don't think that's a planning consideration, but if there is any feedback on that. And again, like the last application, can I ask whether officers think that the applicant has adhered to the statement of community involvement guidelines set out by Waverley? I know they don't have to consult, but just whether you think that they have based on your SMI. And then last points are just my opinion, is that I think I fundamentally share the concerns raised by Tilford PC and Councillor Monroe, who have been very clear that the proposal amounts to overdevelopment on the plot. Can I ask whether the application could be refused on grounds as it doesn't meet the needs of Tilford, or whether we could use 195 of the MPPF? Thank you.
So on the PDL ground, I think we've covered that a lot in the report, in the update sheet as well. Obviously, the objector has their opinion on PDL. Our opinion is backed up by our own legal team. Richard Ground KC represents the applicant as well. It's been reviewed by myself, my head of service. We are confident in our opinion on PDL. On the open market issue, yeah, these are market dwellings, but that's not a planning consideration. Consultation, from my knowledge, they didn't carry out separate engagement. But for a scheme, we're talking 5 dwellings here. We wouldn't really, it would be sort of a limited level of engagement. The neighbours have been notified 2 times from the local authority. I forget the 4th point you raised. Sorry, Councillor Sullivan. Yeah.
Do you want me to come in? That I think the next, it was a sort of couple of points. It was overdevelopment stroke didn't meet the needs of Tilford. So overdevelopment is a statement. You would need to be thinking as a planning committee, what do you mean by that? Overdevelopment of what? And obviously the significant point is, what is the planning harm that's caused by the proposed development that would lead you? And members, as you are aware, you're a planning committee looking at development across the borough. The borough has a housing need that's borough-wide, not specific to individual villages or settlements. And therefore, housing meets the overall housing need of the borough, not a particular village or settlement.
Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. I like this proposal. I was interested in the objection from Surrey Hills National Landscape that while they object to the proposal, they do acknowledge that the present buildings are unsightly, have no architectural merit. And I agree that the present proposal are in fact a substantial improvement, a much more sensitive approach to the site. I counter Councillor Monroe's objection that there is something better that's struggling to get out with a different quotation that I've been hearing a lot of recently: don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. It may not be the best proposal, but I think it is certainly an acceptable proposal. In terms of the PDL, I'm not going to get into that. I'm happy to accept our officer's legal advice, but more importantly, the Greenbelt issues in general. We need to remember that in terms of the present planning framework, we have to assess Greenbelt in terms of the purpose. Greenbelt isn't all the same thing. There's good Greenbelt and there's less good Greenbelt. I'm happy to accept that this isn't really serving the purposes of the Greenbelt, and I'm quite happy to see that this can be developed as essentially brownfield site. So I like the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pick up on the point that Councillor Monroe and some of the speakers made about there being no affordable housing here. And I note the officer's report, which says that they've considered a clawback clause, and I think I quote, but they think it would not be reasonable or proportionate in this case. Forgive me, officers, but I've yet to see a recommendation where you have considered a clawback report. In my mind, a small development like this would be a perfect, small, reasonable first time to put a clawback in, and I think it should be there because the valuations in a village like Tilford are fluctuate wildly, and I think we're missing an opportunity by not having a clawback. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got the cost review and the affordable housing in front of me. I mean, when we're talking about the figures, we're talking, I mean, quite a small community summit for 5 dwellings. The only reason it's being required to provide affordable housing is because of that site area goes into the definition of major development. The efficiency, obviously, the figures have been independently appraised on behalf of the council by Dixon, so they're representing us in ensuring we're scrutinising any viability assessment that comes before us. It's found that the scheme presents a negative residual land value of £508,572. That's when including a SIL contribution of £306,005. With those kind of discrepancies, you're talking at like a 5 dwelling scheme is going to be the build out rate is going to be relatively quick. So a clawback clause, in my view, would be inappropriate. There's been many appeal cases on the proportionality of including a clawback clause in a legal agreement. I personally don't think it's proportionate in this case, but that's my advice to you.
Thank you. Councillor Hussaini.
While the housing supply shortfall is significant, national policy is clear. The presumption in favour of sustainable development does not override protections where areas of particular importance are affected. This site sits squarely in the Greenbelt, the Surrey Hills National Landscape and the area of great landscape value. These are deeply sensitive designations and harm to them carries substantial weight. The proposal also represents a significant intensification in a quiet rural location outside the settlement boundary. The cumulative impact on landscape character, tranquility, and perceived openness would be materially harmful. Residents have raised valid concerns around traffic noise and pressure on local infrastructure, matters that in the constrained rural environment cannot be dismissed lightly. In the planning balance, the delivery of 4 additional dwellings does not outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt, the Surrey Hills landscape and the character of the area. For these reasons, I support refusal.
So, is there a question that you would like officers to respond to? The report sets out quite clearly why we think this is acceptable within the Greenbelt.
Sorry, could you speak up?
Apologies, I'm just asking the member of the planning committee if there's a question that they would like our officers to answer.
Having listened to the speakers, and there's conflicting opinions around whether it is the Greenbelt issue is adequately addressed or not. Yeah.
So members, we have given you our professional view on whether or not this falls within the criteria of the MPPF. And that's set out clearly in the report. Members, it will be for you to make a decision whether or not you support the officer's position on this, or you do not support that.
To my mind, I would like to agree with Councillor Weldon. I am not convinced of the argument at all about overdevelopment, because it is less development. I don't see it as suburban. I see this as very rural type housing. It is a great improvement to my mind on what is there already. I realise that is subjective. So I cannot see any grounds for objection. No other speakers. Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think really just to address your last point, and of course I respect your view, Madam Chairman. It's common ground that what's there at the moment could be vastly improved. We wouldn't build it today. The question is, can we build the replacement? Is that the very best that we could do? And that's a matter of judgment. Objectors have given their view, with which I agree, their passionate view, based on a deep knowledge of their beloved village. Others have given other views. I ask the committee to use their judgment and come to the right decision. Thank you.
We have a recommendation that this application be granted. When lights show, please vote.
Sorry, we can only see 5 of the 8 votes.
Thank you, Chair. So the vote is 7 in favour of the application and 2 against.
So that is carried. And we come to our last and third application, which is WA 25 2025 007 27. Thank you very much. Safe journey home. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 20 affordable dwellings. Oh. Oh. Thank you, Madam Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 20 affordable dwellings with air source heat pumps, photovoltaic panels and associated car parking, amenity space, refuse and cycle storage following the demolition of 12 existing dwellings at Oxford Ridge in Godalming. The first slide on the screen shows the red line plan on the left-hand side that shows the existing 12 dwellings that are to be demolished. You can see there is a white area in the centre of the site. That's where 2 dwellings have already been demolished. And the aerial photo is on the right-hand side of that slide. The next slide shows the proposed site layout. So it shows that there would be 8 dwellings arranged in pairs of semi-detached dwellings, fronting the western part of the site and also the eastern part of the site. And then to the north, there would be 2 linked blocks of flats that provide 12 flats. All the units would be 2-storey in height. The next slide shows the apartment buildings, which are units 9 to 20. This is in the northern part of the site. The red squares on the plan show the bin stores. And we can see the next slide shows the proposed elevational drawings of the apartments. They are in sort of 2 separate parts. They have hipped roofs, they're 2-storey, and they're linked by a smaller element to provide some visual interest. All of the main primary windows are on the front and rear, although there are some side elevation windows as well. The next slide shows the ground floor plan of the apartment building. Just to note that the 2 apartments on each end of the building, coloured in beige, are the wheelchair accessible flats, and all of the other remaining flats are 1 bedroom. The wheelchair accessible flats are 2 bedroom. The first floor of the apartment building is similar to the ground floor layout, but the 2 end flats in this case are not wheelchair accessible. They are just denoted as 2-bedroom flats. Moving on to the proposed dwellings that front the west and the eastern side of the site. You have plots 1 and 2 fronting the west and the remainder of the dwellings fronting the eastern boundary. Plots 3 and 4 are 3-bedroomed units and all of the other plots are 2-bedroomed units. If we move on to the elevations of the dwellings, these are the 2-bedroom houses. So again, they're very straightforward, very familiar in terms of their style and their character, and they use gabled roofs. Again, we have the floor plan of the 2-bedroom units. Again, very familiar floor plans with main primary windows to the front and rear. These are the 3-bedroomed elevations, just to show that they are slightly wider in their elevational makeup rather than the 2-bedroom units, which are slightly narrower. We have a street view of houses, plots 3 to 8. These are facing the eastern side of Oxford Ridge. And you can see that they would have off-street parking in between them. So we have some photographs This is taken from the western side of Oxford Ridge looking east. So the two dwellings in the centre of the photograph, to the rear of the photograph, they would be demolished. And that's where the new dwellings and apartments would be constructed. We have a photograph showing the existing, showing the proposed dwellings 1 and 2 on the eastern side. That's where, that's where houses 1 and 2 would be located. Those two dwellings that are faced in red brick, they would be demolished. And the two dwellings on the left-hand side of that photograph with the painted brick, they are outside the site, so they would be retained. And this is on the western side, facing the western side of Oxford Ridge. This photograph is looking southwest at one of the previous phases of the development to show the new houses that have been built, and they're very similar style with gabled roofs, pitched roofs, 2-storey dwellings. The application site is on the right-hand side of the photograph, just out of the photograph. And this is looking at the southern end of the site, so you can see where the site curves around Oxford Ridge, and the dwellings on the right-hand side, they would be demolished. And these are the eastern part of the site, the dwellings that would be demolished, and this is where houses 3 and 4 would be constructed. And then we have further towards the north on the eastern frontage of the site, those dwellings that are in the buff brick coloured, they would be demolished. And the building that is annotated by the blue arrow, that is the Oxford Social Club, and that is outside the site, and that's to the north of the site. And then this is looking at the rear of the Oxford Social Club, which is outside the site. So the application site is on the right-hand side of the photograph, and you have that footpath linking the eastern side of Oxford Ridge with the western side of Oxford Ridge. A committee update sheet has been prepared for this item, and I would draw members' attention to the additional consultative responses that are listed on the update sheet that raise no objection to the application. There is also an additional condition 20 on the update sheet as well. The report sets out all of the planning issues for this item, and overall, whilst it is considered that there would be some identified harm to the amenities of the caretaker's flat at the Oxford Social Club, given the benefits of the scheme, which include the contribution to overall housing land supply, affordable housing land supply, the identified harm is not considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme in the planning balance. There is one further update to note for the committee, and this is to the recommendation, and this is due to the outstanding consultative response from the lead local flood authority, Surrey County Council, in their operation as lead local flood authority. As this consultative response has not yet been received in relation to surface water drainage, the recommendation is updated to that delegated powers are granted to the Assistant Director of Planning, subject to no objection being raised by Surrey County Council as lead local flood authority, and the completion of the agreement to secure the affordable housing, and to the conditions to grant permission. And the conditions are as set out on the agenda, with the additional condition 20 as noted on the update sheet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We do have one speaker, Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. Well, in front of you, members, you've got a update sheet, which at the top gives you Natural England's response, which says they've confirmed that the site's between 400 5 kilometres of the Weldon Heaths, and they say developments of fewer than 20 dwellings do not need a mitigation strategy. Well, I mean, how ridiculous is it that a development of 20 dwellings needs a mitigation strategy, but 4 developments of 5 or 2 of 10 homes or whatever don't? I mean, you know, this is how ridiculous the approach of the authorities in respect of the Weldon Heaths become. How can you know what to believe when you know? I've read it out from paragraph 16 of the statutory obligations, as referred to in the National Planning Policy Framework, says that you can't exempt any development that might have an impact, which is, you know, within the visitor catchment zone. You can't exempt it from appropriate assessment. This is a bit of an exception, this one is, because the Natural England's view is actually different to what our officers are saying, in a way, and our officers are absolutely right. The best way of measuring the impact is through the occupancy rate. You can't just count the number of houses, really. It's the number of people that are going to be in them which affects it more. And that's what is done in the Thames Basin Heath. That element I certainly agree with. So this is, it replaces 12 existing houses with 8 houses and 12 flats. So even though there's a net gain of units, the officer report says that the total occupancy is 60 before and 60 afterwards, which I think is, if that is correct, I would absolutely 100% agree with the officers in that respect. No appropriate assessment is required because there is no increase in number of residents and there's no need for an appropriate assessment. So it's a shame that we don't have the flood risk issue in there, but if officers trust, then obviously we want this built. It's been going on for donkey's years, Oxford Ridge has. We want this finished off. It's a shame that for all the expense we're not gaining a lot of units or anything out of it, but nevertheless, let's get it done and hope that it ends up when all the utility works and everything's sorted, that we get a flagship development out of the lot of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor MacLeod.
A small question, actually, Madam Mayor. The only person affected is the caretaker and the social club site. Did he object at all? There didn't seem to be any objections, even from the caretaker.
Thank you, Chair. The officer report notes that no letters of representation were received on this application.
Okay, so he didn't object, in fact. Okay, thank you.
Any other speakers? So we'll move to the recommendation, which is slightly altered, but you've all heard. So when lights show, please vote. Carried unanimously, and at, is it 10 to 10? That's the end, thank you.